Looks like we're live, so welcome everybody to the second office hours for OMS-CS 6300. And I'm here with what will be the usual situation, which is with Will and Erin. The time is sort of a special time, but we're trying to decide whether this works for people. So I guess we appreciate your feedback and letting us know whether having office hours at this time works well, or having them at 6 o'clock as we used to do is actually better. So just feel free to post comments here and as follow-ups, as resolved follow-ups in which you can say whether I like this time or I don't like this time, and we might do a survey at some point if we don't get enough feedback on this. Okay, so having said that, this is kind of also a special situation. I'm on a different machine than my machine because my machine decided that I had no camera. So I'm using a different computer, which means that I might need to struggle for a few minutes just to get on the Piazza page. And what I'm going to do, therefore, is I'm going to let Erin and Will say hi and do their announcements. And in the meanwhile, I'll set up what I need to answer your questions, and then I'll be back on screen when they're done. So take your time.
You want to go first?
You can.
Okay. Hi, everybody. While we've got you, I was going to give you a heads up on the grading. I realized earlier today that I started working on your survey grades early, and then I forgot that there were late submissions that could still come in, and so I stopped working on them, and then I didn't start again. But I will. Somebody reminded me of that today, and so I will definitely get them done this weekend. So you'll have your survey grades this weekend. And Erin is going to be working on assignment 2, and she can probably tell you that. And I suppose we'll probably race to see who gets done first.
I'm probably gonna finish up assignment 2 on Saturday, just because the coming back from Georgia, I want to make sure that the assignments we need to get out and everything are done first. So Saturday should be good for that. Still got red in my hair from that trip.
Yeah, but at least she wasn't working on them last week, because I think she must have been sick, because she was positively green.
Really? Yeah.
Really?
But hey, I'm back where I have a network connection again, and a cat. See? And back to the on-topic shirts, where we've got alias YOLO equals get push force to remember to tell you, don't do that. Like, really don't do that from this point on. Don't use the reset things we gave you for assignment 2. After this point, you don't want to nuke your repo anymore.
All right, so I'm all set. And I think we can start looking at the questions. I'm thinking, basically just in terms of announcements on my side, I was on mute and trying to set up my audio, so I don't know if you already said it, but basically assignment 3 is due this week and assignment 4 is going to start next week. And this week we also have the, I think it's called participation survey, if I recall correctly how I called it, which is basically, it's not really an assignment. It's just something that, since in order to be able to answer it, you need to read the welcome message and be aware of what it says. That's just a way of sort of forcing you to read the welcome message and understand the class policy. So again, it's not really an assignment. It should take you 5 minutes to complete, and it's mostly for your own sake, so that you don't have surprises like you submit your assignment late, but you say, oh, but since it was a resubmission, it shouldn't be counted as late, or stuff like that. So it's really, really, really simple. It's just about the policies for the class. Having said that, let me get to the questions. And let me see. The first one is, who created the video lecture artwork, cartoon characters and such? Postscriptum, originally, I didn't like the idea of assignments being due before the weekend, but it's actually been very helpful. Thanks. Oh, that's the kind of feedback we want to get. And we didn't pay Mike, I promise. So who created the video?
You didn't.
Oh, thank you, Will. So Will is so invested in the class that he pays students to get us good publicity. So anyways, who created the video lectures? There's actually a note, I believe, in the first lecture that explains that, but I'm kind of, I don't know, embarrassed to say that, but it was my wife. So the story is that when I was preparing this class, I grossly underestimated the amount of effort necessary, and also the fact that Charles Isbell was the one who convinced me to do it, also grossly underestimated the amount of effort required. So basically, it turns out that I was working day and night to try to get the class done on time for to offer it in the spring of, I think it was 2015, or maybe the first time, and so my wife, two things is she took pity by looking at how much I was working on it, and basically also looking at my graphics, and so she decided she was going to help me, and so all the characters and all the graphics are kind of her doing, and I'm very grateful for that, because she just volunteered basically her time for that.
Alex, I was first a TA in spring of 2015. You started in 2014.
Oh boy, time flies. That's right. 2014. Ooh. Yeah, so we've been doing this for a few years then. Okay, and it was so much fun that it only feels like 3 years instead of 4. Okay, the next question is, the assignment states, make sure that every test method has a suitable oracle, that is either an assertion or an expected exception, and that the tests are non-trivial. Trivial can be very subjective in my opinion, and I just wanted to get an idea of what kind of test the assignment is looking for. For example, in the Java doc for the count a number function, it reads, if the current string is null, empty, or uninitialized, the method should return 0. So I wrote 3 separate tests for a string that is null, empty, or uninitialized. Some will consider these test cases very similar and trivial, but I'm testing 3 specific conditions on the function nonetheless. Will these tests be considered non-trivial? I will say so. So for us, trivial tests are and I know it's subjective, it's really hard to define it in a sort of rigorous way, because in the end, somehow it's a little bit of it is that it's in the eye of the beholder, but it's also really subjective. And the point is, what we consider trivial is, for example, if you have a test case that says, okay, I'm testing this with a string of 10 characters, and in which I'm replacing, from position 2 to position 6. And then the next test you do it from position 2 to position 7, and then the next one you do it from position 2 to position 8. So test cases that basically are testing exactly the same thing in terms of if you think about the domain of the code. And if you put some effort into thinking about the test cases, that should not happen at all. So and I hate to say it in this way, but basically, if they are trivial, you will know that you're kind of slacking and just copying and pasting. If you this is a perfect example, actually, the one you provide. If you thought about, sorry.
Erin put it very well earlier today. She said, I think it was Erin. It was Erin. Said, if you can, without twisting yourself into pretzel logic, if you can think of ways where each test could fail when the other one would succeed, they're probably not trivial. If, on the other hand, under most circumstances, if one fails, the other's always going to fail, then they're probably trivial.
Yeah,
that's actually a very nice way to put it.
Erin is very smart.
I would also say that we asked them to put comments on their tests, and the comment is really a good chance for you to say what you think you're testing. And if you can't write, I'm testing for this circumstance, without going, I am testing positions 2 through 6, now I'm testing 3 through 7, and literally copying your input, then you're probably not testing a different specific thing. If you can explain what you're testing and they are actually different things, then you're probably good.
Okay, so hopefully that answered. And actually, I have to say, what RJ posted is a perfect example, because you're saying I wrote 3 separate tests because they test 3 separate conditions. So you put some time into thinking about the fact that there's 3 different possible conditions and you want to test them. So that it's a good way of judging the fact that these test cases are non-trivial. They might be similar, but they're non-trivial because actually the code might fail for any of these subdomains. And in fact, we haven't seen it yet because we haven't gotten to the kind of testing part of the class. When we'll do black box testing, and so kind of forward pointer to that. The idea is that if you're testing the same subdomain, so it's the way to say what Erin is saying in kind of in the context of black box testing is, if you're testing the same subdomain, then the test cases tend to be trivial. Like for example, if all, the subdomain is one in which all the inputs in that subdomain will fail in the same way. And so that's sort of the general idea. But I don't want to confuse you any further. So the way Erin presented it is perfect. And so use that as judgment. And if you spend time to think about it, I'm pretty sure that this is not going to happen. And of course, even if we judge some test cases to be trivial and they're not trivial in your opinion, you can always argue with us and convince us that they're not trivial because this is what you had in mind when you wrote those test cases. Okay, so next question. How do we create a test for uninitialized? Some discussion was saying it is the same as null, so I'm confused on how to test it. Got the same question. I think we just do not use the function set string, but let professor confirm it. So we also have some internal discussion on that, I have to say. And the reason why we mentioned the uninitialized, and Erin can kind of jump in after I provide my explanation, is because there's always some kind of confusion on what is null, what is not. So in one way to see it for me is just like it's either null or there is a value assigned to the string. So what I want to make sure is you don't confuse uninitialized for empty string, because empty string is a perfectly legitimate string. So I can set my string to be empty, and that will not be initialized. So by definition, something uninitialized is something that is like kind of as the default value, and you didn't change it. And so in the case of the string, it should really be null. So, but we put that there as again to cover our bases, because sometimes there were on similar assignments there were some confusion. So, Erin, feel free to kind of jump in and give your perspective. But the way I see it, it should really be null or initialized tend to be the same case, and if it's not null, basically it means that it's initialized, it has been initialized, and it has a value, even if it's an empty string. Because an empty string, again, it's a string. It's just an extreme case, a corner case of a string, which is a string that doesn't contain any character.
Yeah, there were actually some really thorough threads on this in the rest of Piazza right now. And yeah, basically, if you're not explicitly initializing it, that's the criteria I was concerned with. It's probably null for 95% of the people implementing this, but somebody out there is going to have a really different implementation behind the scenes, or use constructors in a different way, and they won't see that as being the same thing as null. And I just wanted to make sure, if you don't actually set the string to something, it should be behaving that same way.
And also be careful, because sometimes, so if you're talking about, for example, positive integers, you can say that uninitialized is -1 because it's outside the domain. With the string, it's hard to pick a value that would be the uninitialized value, because there's no special string really. Any string is a string. So be careful if you decide to use something else as an initialized, because it might clash with a perfectly legitimate string.
Yeah, so I definitely wasn't encouraging them to use a different value. But I just wanted to make sure they didn't see that as a solution for handling null pointers. Like, oh, it can never be null because I'll just make it start not null.
Right. And if you have doubts, of course, feel free to post on Piazza to look at the threads. I should be able to clarify it. But let's put it this way: if you go with null, not null, you'll be safe. Okay, so this is the next question. But there was a follow-up here. Okay, I found.
Yeah, that thread goes really far in depth into this issue.
Right. If you do not use a set string at all, the string will be considered empty, right? Well, it depends, right? It depends on what you do in the constructor. It depends. So you can really implement it in n possible ways. And the way I will implement it, and I'm not giving away anything special, because this is not about the implementation. It's really to make this assignment is really to make sure that you can write some Java code and some JUnit tests, and you can run the IDE basically. So, but the way I will do it is that I will, in the constructor, just set the string, which is the default value, to null, and then unless I call, I pass something on, or I set it, then that will be the default value. But you can, even with a calling set string, it could be initialized if you, in your constructor, do something funky or creative and initialize it to something. But don't overthink it, because it's very simple. Very simple stuff. So don't worry about it too much, and you can read the threads that are kind of thorough and get into the details. Okay, next question, which is marked as resolved. Let's see, I don't know if it's because it has been resolved. I don't think I clicked it. Can you please go over the reverse and characters and convert digit to names method? What is your recommended approach to tackle those tasks? So the approach to tackle those tasks is simply to implement them in the way in which they're described in the comments. So we're not gonna provide a sort of a step-by-step implementation. I think also because they should be fairly trivial algorithms. And in fact, in this case, Erin wrote the assignment, and I wrote, I wrote a solution myself. So as a sort of a unaware kind of a student who's just reading for the first time, and all I did was basically to just implement whatever was described in the interface, and it worked. So just think about what the method should do and find a way to get it to work using the string methods, and it should be fairly simple. You shouldn't need to write much code. Also, can you briefly walk through an example of the JUnit testing and what is expected by the autograder? So I don't know what you mean by an example of a JUnit testing. The way JUnit works, and if we have a pointer to a tutorial that explains exactly the same thing, is that you normally create some of the object you want to test, that you set the state of the object in a way that you want, which is the state that you want to test, and then you call one or more methods. And after you make the call, you have to check whether the method behaves, whether the methods behave as expected. So what you will have is either an assertion on the state of the object, or something that says that you're expecting a given exception to be thrown. So that's pretty much it. So that's all what JUnit test cases do. And you can have multiple assertions in some cases. There's some philosophy that goes that you should have only one assertion because you want to test only one thing. Some people like to optimize and test multiple things. It's, we're not at that level of kind of peakiness. So just create an object, set the state, call the functionality that you want to test, and check that it does what it's expected. That's pretty much it. And don't worry too much about the autograder. Just write your test cases so that they work and they pass. Make sure that our test cases pass, and you should be good. FYI, YouTube chat doesn't seem to be working. Okay, it should be working actually. And if you're using the chat, I haven't seen any chat. So it's better actually if you use the Piazza follow-ups.
We don't support the YouTube chat, so I don't usually turn it on for these things because we're watching the Piazza, and that's where you ask your questions. So if you chat over there and you think we're going to answer, we're not. So it's just better not to have it on. Right,
and in fact, we should probably disable it. Okay, there's a follow-up, and by the way, also be careful because there's a follow-up about reverse and characters on the post about the YouTube chat. So make sure if you have something that is a different topic to have a separate follow-up, otherwise we might miss it completely. But basically, this one is saying that I'm struggling with a reverse and characters, especially since strings are immutable. I'm a bit lost. Should I be using an array recursion that are promised with some approaches given how Java handles chars? No, you shouldn't be worried about the fact that since strings are immutable, what it means is just strings get replaced and they don't get modified, but it's not a problem for this implementation. So again, think about the simplest possible way of implementing this. The struggle with this one, put it this way, there shouldn't be any struggle in writing the algorithms because they're fairly simple. The only issues that we expect is like just setting up with the IDE or setting up JUnit if you haven't used it before. But the issue should not really be that the implementation of the methods, because we try to keep it as simple as possible without making it completely trivial. Okay, next question. Is there any requirements about running time? No, there's no requirements about running time. Of course, if it takes a week to run your test cases, you might be in trouble, but otherwise anything reasonable, and this code should be simple enough that you shouldn't have any issue with efficiency. Is it okay for us to fork our repo since it creates a repo that is still private that might help prevent some catastrophic mistakes? And there's a follow-up that says, if we will talk about fork, this is something which wasn't really covered in class. If we talk about this topic, can we please start with the definition of what fork is? So let's say the reason why we didn't cover fork and some other features in Git is because we want you guys to kind of be aware of Git and be able to use it in a sort of at least its basic functionality, but we didn't want to kind of overdo it and overwhelm you with Git. So forking a repository basically means that you create a copy of the remote repository, which is identical at the point in which you do the forking. And sure, you can use that, for example, if you want to play with the repositories and then either merge it later on, or just keep that one as a separate copy in which you do your experiments and then use the other one. Honestly, I think for this kind of assignments, it's a little overkill, because I don't see any way in which you will screw up the repository. Because I mean, unless you really are planning to do something wild with pushing forceful pushes, and if you look at Aaron's t-shirt, you shouldn't do that in the first place. So, but in general, really, there's nothing you can do to the repo unless you rewrite history. That will create problems. So even if you commit 300 times and you change your methods and you change them back, all we're going to get in the end is a commit ID, which is for the version that you want us to grade, and history doesn't matter, because it's your own business in a sense how you want to proceed with that. It was a different story for assignment 2, of course, because the whole goal of the assignment was for you to follow a specific set of steps, and therefore we were looking for a specific history. But in this case, you can do whatever you want with the repo, again, except for just don't do push minus force. Short of that, you should be fine. So if you want to fork, you can go ahead, but I don't really see any advantage in this case in doing that.
I'd say it's more likely to cause catastrophic mistakes than prevent them, because the only time I've noticed anybody creating forks, and it creates them in the organization, so we definitely see them, they'll tend to forget to move stuff back to the main repo, or they'll create their new assignments as submodules in the forked repo, and then when they end up trying to copy them back, they copy them back as a submodule instead of a regular folder, and so it's basically a redirect, and the code isn't there when we pull it. You have the potential to make some interesting messes that way, at least as much as you have the potential to prevent them.
You also there's the tendency for people when they make copies of the repo, fork or some other way, to not necessarily be aware, to think, oh, it's mine now, so it's okay if this one's public, and that is not the case. And if your code exists anywhere in public and somebody copies it, you are going to be one of the 2 people that gets reported on suspicion of cheating. And if you didn't intend to do it, that's tragic. But if you share your code someplace where people can see it, that is a violation of the honor code, even if you didn't mean for them to copy it.
Okay, the next question seems to be, oh, by the way, just quick wrap up on that. I mean, glad Aaron mentioned that, because redundancy is always an issue. So it's also, we mentioned that in, I think in the.
You want to say that again, Alex?
Yeah. Let me repeat that. Redundancy sometimes is an issue. No, redundancy is always an issue, because as Aaron said, you can make mistakes, and especially the forking is one. You can use that kind of in a diligent way. Maybe it's fine, but especially do not make copies of the file that you have under CVS or under Git. Sorry, under the revision control system, because that's a recipe for disaster. I think I put that in the video lecture as well, but I repeated and repeated over and over to my students also on class and on campus class, because sometimes you don't trust the revision control system. So you say, I'm going to make a copy anyways. Then you work on a copy, and then you work on another copy. Before you know, you have no idea what is the latest copy. So the best thing about this system is that you just have one copy of the code, you commit it, you push it, you can always go back. So there's no way you can kind of screw it up, as long as you commit and keep track of your code. So avoid redundancy, and it's and you'll be safer. And you'll be happy that you did that. Okay, next question. I might sound silly, but I haven't worked with Java for a while. Do I need to use a main function to be able to use the method setting the string? I try to get it from the method directly without creating an object. It will output a text message that I specified, but it wouldn't allow me to enter any text. No, you don't need a main. So this is actually, as you can see, this is a sort of a library class. So the drivers, so whatever executes the code, is in the JUnit test cases. And I'm afraid that when you say enter any text, don't think about this as an interactive application in which you enter some text. So all what you're writing is a class that provides some functionality. It doesn't do anything by itself without a driver or a main, as you say. But in this case, you won't have a main because you're not building a program around it. So all you will have is the drivers that are the test cases. So the test cases will be, in a sense, your main, your entry point for the execution. So don't, and you know, this is a typical sort of, you know, misstep that students do, which is to think about, oh, if I'm writing a program, it should be able to run it and from the command line and do something. No, in this case, you're writing a utility class, and so the utility class will just sit there until somebody uses it. In your case, the users are your JUnit test cases. So do not worry about the main. It's perfectly fine if the class doesn't do anything after you compile it, unless you run the test cases on it. I hope this makes sense. Is there a possibility that the t-square might be affected by the hurricane during the submission period? Hopefully not. If it does, just let us know. And the good thing is that what really counts is your commit. And so if you commit and push your code, and actually, as we said in the message that we'll send around, commit and push often rather than rarely, and you will be fine. Because basically, even if you weren't able to submit on t-square, and there is a good reason for that, you can always say, okay, well, I finished my work, I committed and pushed it, this is the commit ID, and that will show us that you did it on time, because the commit IDs have actually a timestamp and all that jazz. Is 0.01 a good test case for all three functions, or just belong to any case having a mixture of digits and non-digits? So first of all, I will, will discourage to discuss solutions to assignments publicly. So if you have a question about the specific solution or part thereof, you should post that privately. So I guess, yeah, I'd rather not answer that one, because this is basically whatever we say that will result in everybody having the same test case in one way or the other. So if you have questions about the solution, please post that privately, and we will respond there. Or, I mean, unless you can ask it again, it's a generic question about the solution. But normally, it's a slippery slope, so be careful. And it doesn't matter too much for these assignments, because, as I said, the main goal of these first assignments is just to get you started on the platforms. But in general, be careful, because it's very easy to kind of ask something and then somebody answers something is even more specific, and before you know, you got basically half a solution on a Piazza thread. So be careful with that. Just to confirm, for convert digits to name function, is start position is equal to end position, say they're both 4. Then we're just supposed to convert the 4th character of the string, right? I think so, because it's inclusive, and Erin, if you can confirm, but
yeah, we've had a few threads on that as well.
And basically, so I saw a few threads also on about like supposed corner cases, and all the ones I saw, basically the corner cases are really not. So they are corner cases, but they're mainly, if you just follow the specification, they work fine. You get the right behavior. So they're not corner cases that you have to address specifically. Like in this case, if you implement the function correctly, and actually, just for the fun of it, for some definition of fun, I guess, I implemented test cases for some of the corner cases that I saw posted on Piazza, and my code was just behaving fine for all of those. I didn't have to kind of put in any special handling. So again, if you implement the methods correctly, it should be you should be good, or correctly according to the specification, which I guess means correctly. I know that some programming languages can differentiate between null and empty, but in Java is null, empty, and initialize the same thing. I would say so. From my perspective,
no, null and empty are not the
same. No, hold on a second. No, sorry, you're right. If you're talking about empty string, I guess it depends on what you mean by empty, in the sense if there's a concept of empty in the programming language. If that's what you mean, it could be that in some programming languages there is. In Java, if you're talking about strings, an empty string is a string, so it's not a null string. So sorry if I was imprecise.
If you think about it, a string variable is a variable, right? And in Java, just about everything, except for the real low level things, but just about everything you work with is variables that are pointers. So when you're looking at a null string, you're looking at a pointer that points to nothing. When you're looking at an empty string, you're looking at a pointer that points to a string variable that has nothing in it, which is completely different things.
Right.
So yeah, sorry, go ahead, Erin.
Some of the links I put in the thread that was linked earlier, 239, really go into just a massive amount of detail on how Java initialization works and nulls and reference variables. So if you're interested in the nitty-gritty details, they're really out there. They start with those threads, and you can go into technical details forever.
Now, in theory, some of the IDEs will complain if you haven't explicitly set something, even though a lot of things do have default values. So I believe strings by default are null, but a lot of the IDEs, if you haven't set it to null and then you try and ask if it is null, will complain. So there is technically, at least in the IDE, a difference between an unset and a null, even though it may not be reliable, and it may be something that the IDE is warning you about, even though it's not really a problem.
Yeah, it looks like Java's better about having a default initialization value for class variables and static variables. It's not so great about the local variables. Those really, really need to be initialized.
Yeah. So there is technically a difference between uninitialized and null, but if you're using an IDE and not the person that asked if it was okay if he did everything just using a text editor, almost certainly your IDE will tell you if you've got that problem.
Okay, so let me get to the next question. Do we have to consider real numbers? No, I think in the specification we just say a contiguous sequence of digits, and so don't it's just you don't have to worry about the real numbers or any kind of separation between like commas or periods between the numbers. For all the projects, including the group project, will they be coded in Java? The survey asked which language you were most comfortable coding with. Just want to know if this will influence the group project programming language. No, it will all be in Java. So we'll do some Android programming, but that's also Java basically. So at least for now, it's Java. So we asked about the programming language just to get a kind of a better picture, and to make sure that we match people. We have at least somebody who's an expert in Java in each team, and if somebody is an expert in 4 languages, we'll consider that kind of I can imagine a stronger expert, or kind of more expert than people who know only one language. But we're not going to change the language for the projects. Okay, so there's no other questions. So let's see if something else pops up in the next minute or so. In the middle, Will and Erin, anything else we should share before we close the office hour?
I'll just repeat something I said on Piazza, because a couple of people have asked when you're going to see your teams. I know we said this in the office hours as well, so the people watching this probably aren't the ones who need to hear it again, but we don't create your teams until a few days before the first team assignment thing opens up, because there will be students who have personal problems and whatever that need to drop the course. And if we built them now, we'd have to shuffle everybody again before the thing started. So it's just easier to just assign the teams just before you're going to use them. And Jose, one of the students says he has a question. Just give him a second to finish typing it.
Okay.
I hear something in the background. What could that be? I heard a child.
Oh, I didn't hear it. Must be listening a lot closer than me.
Must be mine. I'm in the interest of full disclosure, I'm single parent this week, so it's these office hours are very. I'm glad that we managed to finish them up, because they were fairly risky in terms of somebody starting to scream and me having to run off from the office hours, but didn't happen. So I think we're good until the end. Or it didn't happen. It barely happened. Let's put it this way.
I think my cat has turned off my ups more often than your kids have screamed during office hours.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. They're office hour compliant kids. So.
Yeah.
Now we're all, you know, it has to be a great question because we're all waiting on pins and needles. Just kidding. Take your time and no rush and no pressure. Yeah, I think in terms of, you know, otherwise, let me see, we talked about the next assignment yeah, so we should be, I don't think we have any other announcement or anything. Okay, so we got the question, which is, so in the test cases, does each test case use the initialized value from the previous test case? How can I uninitialize if that's the case I need to consider? Okay, so first of all, that's a, you know, I'm glad you asked because that's a big no-no. You don't want to have test cases depending on other test cases because those might be run in any order. So there's no, in fact, in particular, I think JUnit does not guarantee the order in which the test cases are run. So
JUnit threads them and does all sorts of crazy stuff. Like you have no idea how they're going to run.
Right. So that's and in general, it's just a bad practice. Those are what are called what's that?
There's a setup. You can set up a setup method that's guaranteed to run before each of them runs. If there is something that you want to be, as a matter of fact, I think we have one in there.
Yeah.
So if there's anything that you want to always be the case for every one of your tests, throw it into the setup method, and then it will always be set up. But no, everything starts out as if it was the only thing you had run.
Well,
right.
Even if you run all the tests.
They can't really change the setup method in this one because it'll change the example test we gave them.
Oh, you're right. Okay, so you can't.
But by the way, in this case, I think the question is also, how can I uninitialize? You don't need to uninitialize because every test case creates a fresh object. So that the object is by definition uninitialized. And you shouldn't write your test cases so that they assume that the situation is any different. And generally speaking, and I was trying to think of the term. So the test cases that depend on other test cases. I think it's a brittle test cases, or I don't remember what's the exact terminology, but there's actually some research.
I think the official term is mistake.
And it's definitely a mistake. So test cases should be independent. And sometimes it's convenient to have test cases depending on other test cases because of the fact that there's a complex data. But in that case, just copy and paste and create another test case is totally independent. It's worth the extra work and the extra redundancy in this case because test cases should be independently runnable. And the next one is, so should I consider an empty string as an initialized string? No. So the whole discussion was that you can initialize a string to an empty string, and that will be an initialized string. So in most cases, unless you come up with a very creative implementation and that we didn't think about, an initialized that should really be a null string. So an initialized and null should be the same thing. An empty string, I can create an object of the my custom string and set it to an empty string, and that's a perfectly legitimate string. So do not use empty string as uninitialized because that's not. I mean, that's going to create trouble because I can create a counterexample basically in which your empty string is not uninitialized, and at that point you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah. The setup that's already in the function is instantiating a new my custom string object, and the teardown is setting the variable to null, and basically throwing that object away. So they definitely have a fresh new object every single test.
Actually, this is not coming from my place, I have to say. I think this is the cat.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
It wasn't the cat earlier. That one was the cat.
So anyways, I think we're getting a little too personal here. So let's see if there's, I think there's a follow-up. So I could run one of the functions without setting it as an uninitialized string.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure what you mean by you can run.
He's saying if you ran one of the functions that's supposed to work on the string, but you haven't called setString, or whatever the method's called.
Yeah, it's called setString. So yeah, basically, if
Yeah, but the question is, I can run without setting it as an uninitialized string.
yeah, because
Yeah.
it's
In other words,
instantiated in the setup function, so you have the object.
Well, I guess the thing to me is like setting something to uninitialize doesn't make too much sense in the sense that I mean, something is uninitialized, but you don't set it. See what I mean?
right.
So that's why I find it a little confusing.
So what he's asking is, does he have to set it uninitialized? No, you leave it uninitialized. You
Yeah, you
don't
leave it
set it,
uninitialized,
and therefore it is uninitialized, as opposed to setting it to a string or setting it to null.
So I guess if you really want to be, sorry, this is getting philosophical, but it's so ignore us if it gets too weird. But you could have an uninitialized bit that you keep around, to the to keep track of whether something was initialized or not. But it will be redundant. So if you just use null as an initialized, then you don't have to keep track of whether it was initialized or not. And it also I don't see any real usage for that. Oh, so I guess
And Jose, you don't need to apologize for Alex's bad English.
No.
This might be a missing a comma issue. If he's saying if he could run one of the functions without setting it, meaning without setting the string, then as an uninitialized string, then yeah.
That reminds me.
It's uninitialized.
That reminds me of a book, actually, Jose. If you and again, you shouldn't definitely apologize for your English. Just listen to me. And but I read this book. It's very interesting, which is I think it's entitled "Eat, Shoots, and Leaves."
Yep.
And it's about how the importance of the punctuation, because the missing commas or extra commas can completely change the meaning of the sentence. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, which I love personally, read the book. It's very interesting. It also kind of teaches you something about punctuation. It's always a nice read, whether you're a native speaker or not, actually, because I think everybody can benefit from that. So anyways, enough with the...
I have a number of T-shirts along those lines, but I don't think some of them are not appropriate to wear in this class.
Then let's not, before we get sued.
Yeah, but if he doesn't set it, then yeah, that's uninitialized for this purpose, at least without getting into the horrible nitpicky level of default initializations and stuff in Java. The setup instantiates it. If you don't initialize it to anything, then that's uninitialized.
I already found the book.
Yep, it's a good book, and it's a short one as well, so it's an easy read. Anyways, if people are interested, and I get plenty of this, when I moved to the US, I never studied English, so I had to kind of learn in the field and while working. So I was a very avid reader of all these sorts of books that you can use to improve your language. They don't help, but hey, I tried.
And if you keep talking, more questions are going to come in, like the one that just came in.
Okay, well, what else we have to do? The night is young. Can we separate the tests into separate test classes, or even create a test suite, or will that break the auto grader? No, you should keep the same structure that we use, which is like one class with multiple tests. Because
extra, you can put them wherever.
Right.
The ones we gave you need to be in the class we gave you, named what we named them.
So I'm sympathetic with the request, because I also like to have multiple test classes and a test suite, but in this case it will complicate the grading. The grading might get you into trouble, because then you might get some bad grades just because of the fact that you did more than what you were supposed to do instead of less. But so just to make things simple, I will keep things simple. I will just use one class, and this case for sure for the ones that we provided.
Yeah, basically, we're gonna run a test suite, and it's gonna look for all of those test functions and make sure they all pass and are there. There's still some manual stuff to make sure everything makes sense, but it's a lot easier to count everything up automatically and not rely on us miscounting something.
Right. And okay, so we just got a new question. I like this one. So just to confirm, and okay, my custom string says string to empty string. My custom string is empty. Yes. without this string, my custom without this set string, my custom string is uninitialized. Yes, again, unless you write a funky constructor, but I think without complicating the picture, yes, this is correct. My custom string set string to null. My custom string is null. Correct. And yeah, so that's fine. And I don't really see the case. So you bring up an interesting case because you set string to null, it's initialized. It's an uninitialized. Sorry, it's null, but it's initialized because you initialized it to null. So it creates kind of an interesting situation. But as I say, I think you're confused because you're overthinking it. So basically, think about, if the string is set to something else than null, it's an initialized string. Otherwise, it's treat null as uninitialized in the same way, and you'll be fine.
Right. I wasn't trying to add like an additional requirement so much as cover scenarios where people handle this oddly. Like,
yeah,
just to make that
just be aware that
whole in the requirements.
But basically, let me just say something. For all the people who find this a little confusing, just don't worry about it, in the sense that if all you think about is like, is either null or set to something, that's perfectly fine.
And so the reason it's important to think that way is because what you've said here is technically correct, but as we said before, many string variables are automatically initialized to null anyway. So you may not be able to tell the difference depending on how you've set up your string. You may not be able to tell the difference between not having called it and having set it explicitly to null. So that's why you might as well treat them as more or less the same, because in a lot of cases, there won't be a difference when you actually get to look at the piece of the variable.
Right. The other reason I said that is because sometimes people would put error checks in their set string so that you can't call set string null. And then, what exactly is a null string at that point? It gets a little complicated. But like if those distinctions don't mean much to you, then they're probably irrelevant, and the null and the uninitialized are going to be the same in your scenario, and it'll be just fine to just worry about the null string.
And I think the more we talk about it, the more we're going to confuse people. So I think that's, we should just stop here with listen to what we said up to now. you should be fine. We come up with more scenarios, and it'll be even more confusing, especially given the time. All right, so I guess before we turn into pumpkins, unless something pops up in the next 20 seconds, or we get a warning from somebody who's writing a question, we can start saying our goodbyes. And please, let us know in the follow-ups whether you like this time or not. And as I said, we may also do a survey to get a kind of a more a broader perspective. But whether you're watching live or you watch the recorded office hours, just let us know whether you think this time is good. And it should be good because it should work well for the at least for a broader range of time zones. But it depends. Some people might prefer to do it before dinner in case they're on the on this side of the world. All right. Having said that, goodbye, everybody. Thank you for attending the office hours as usual. It's to me one of the most enjoyable parts of the class. And we'll see you next week, and we'll see you on Piazza before that. And now, as usual, I'm going to let Erin and Will have the final word.
So long, everyone.
And I'll see you on Piazza as well. And I'm back in town, so it won't be quite as crazy with the hours.